Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and recently I got to hang around on patch 8.3 PTR a little bit more. I got to poke around as Blizzard is unlocking more information when it comes to the actual content and how we'll be able to acquire gear. In this video, I was able to dive into a little bit of the beginning story elements, which I'm not gonna spoil, but I was looking around the game and I was doing some of the storylines and I figured out how you can get corruption gear. Corruption is going to be a system that will be replacing Warforging as well as Titan Forging when it comes to the next patch, patch 8.3 Visions of N'Zoth. Corruption gear is supposed to give you benefits, but also with a drawback, which are going to be a variety of different debuffs that your character might or might not experience, and you're supposed to be able to fight against the corruption with certain other items, Azeroth traits, and more. It's supposed to be a little bit more of like risk-reward type of system, but a very, I would say, the most minimally impactful one in terms of how badly you can screw yourself over with corruption. Yes, you can really take the corruption off the deep end where it really impacts the damage that your character will be able to take, how much healing they will be able to receive, and you'll have a variety of different hurdles to jump through every time you want to do damage, heal, or tank. But it doesn't seem to be too crazy of a setup just yet, at least on PTR, but it very well could be very much blown out of proportion once it goes live. So we'll just have to wait and see how the general community ends up working with the corruption mechanic. But corruption gear is supposed to be a new way for you to get upgrades for gear. Even if it comes with a sort of a debuff, as long as you're able to manage it, you're able to get yourself a gear upgrade. So today I was actually able to see how we get corruption gear and what can you do with it afterwards. Corruption gear is meant to be introduced to the game, but also if you don't like the corruption that is on your gear, you should also be able to remove the corruption. And Blizzard was trying to figure out how they want to figure the pieces of gear, how they want to add corruption or remove corruption, what benefits should it give you for cleansing the piece of gear, and how strong should the item be once you remove this negative positive debuff effect for it. First of all, the best place to get corruption gear is gonna be, well, first of all, any piece of content should have a chance to drop a gear that's corrupted, but if you want a more guaranteed piece or a guaranteed farmable way, will be through the Visions of N'Zoth invasions. The invasions of N'Zoth, the invasions of the old gods, whatever you call it, the new invasions of BFA, which will be very similar to Legion invasion. When you accomplish these invasions after doing a couple different activities, you could choose what you want to do, whether you want to grind mobs or whether you want to do specific assaults, killing rares, but eventually you end up filling up the bar that is needed for the zone, fight a final boss at the end, and then you go in and get your loot, which will give you opportunity to get reputation with that zone, but also the different rewards. Different rewards can be anything from pieces of gear to plain AP to other resources that you'll be utilizing in patch 8.3, but also says a pretty high chance to get you a piece of corruption gear. The corruption gear right now on PTR is about item level 445, and I'm pretty sure that item level might increase over time as almost like a way for you to catch up on gear. So a lot of players that are just starting out the patch should probably start farming this gear for a chance at a good corruption, for a chance to replace some of the gear they currently have, or to catch up some of your alts. And if you get a corruption, that's pretty big. Corruptions can come in many different ways, and Blizzard added a questline on PTR where you guarantee get a piece of bracers with corruption for your class, and the corruption is always going to be the strongest possible corruption that is in the game right now. An increase to critical strike damage. Now this, off the bat, is quite huge. It introduces you to the corruption system and gives you a very good corruption bonus. The corruption it gives you right now is only 5 as well, which is very little, and I believe this piece of gear is on purpose a piece of loot that is supposed to be like a quest item given to you in order to use the corruption cleansing mechanic, but most people won't really want to get rid of that piece of bracers because the extra effect is way too big and the corruption that it gives to you is way too low, so it's never really worth to cleanse that piece of loot. I do wonder if the loot you get will always have that bonus, or will some people get lucky and they'll get the crit bonus and other people will get a mastery increase, versatility, critical strike, or some other side effects. The critical strike bonus that the gear can get, if it does get corruption, benefit from the crit increase in terms of crit damage increase, that alone can realistically be equivalent to like a 20 item level increase. So if you get gloves that are, let's say, 445, but they got the crit bonus for it, you might as well look at them as not 445 but 465 or something along those lines. So the numbers can be different depending on class. Some classes are more crit heavy, like a fire mage with combustion, utilizing that crit damage increase, which feeds into your mastery, which feeds into your playstyle where you use your mastery with blaster master. That's huge. Compared to a class like a Demon Hunter, for example, who likes crit. Crit is good, but crit isn't really there to increase their damage. Well, it essentially does, but they have other mechanics that play with crit. Every time certain abilities critical strike, they refund back resources for them. So crit is a great stat, but even this extra increase, even though they don't focus on critical strikes, they don't have a way to get guaranteed critical strikes in most cases, that bonus is still about 10 item levels increase for them. So a 445 becomes a 455 in their eyes. So you start out with a really good piece of loot, and hopefully Blizzard keeps it the same for everybody so there's not that discrepancy, because that loot on its own, day one, can give players more of a reason to want to play this expansion, this patch update, this last patch with the last raid, or maybe completely dissatisfy them based on the gear that they've gotten, because now it feels like you're behind everyone. However, let's say you get loot that is corrupted, and it has a bad corruption enchant that doesn't benefit your class at all, like, I don't know, movement speed increase. You don't really care about it. It's not worth the corruption that it gives you. Maybe let's say, for example, it gives you a bunch of corruption. So how could you go about cleansing that loot? You go to Mother in the Heart of Azeroth Chamber, and you can pay this currency that you will unlock by doing some of the activities in patch 8.3, mostly horrific visions, and you'll be able to earn that currency very cheap, very easy to acquire. And you'll be able to cleanse your gear with this currency. Blizzard was trying to settle on how they wanted to affect this cleansing. Should the cleansing make the loot just free of corruption? But in a way, it's almost like the corruption is there to give you this upgrade effect. But if it's not an upgrade, should maybe the corruption replace and give you maybe a socket? But they recently ran against that for patch 8.3. And this is a good thing, because this brings on the socket race and how strong gems are. This would have been Bent the Gear 2.0. If you weren't aware and you didn't raid in patch 8.2 for Queen Azara raid, Bent the Gear is the strongest gear in the game. The catch-up gear that you use for your ult ends up being the best raid gear in the game. Not only are the effects of that gear, which one of them is a crit damage increase by, I believe, 3%, and that is huge. That is the best piece of gear you can get from that raid. Even if you get a 455 with a socket and leech, that boots is still better than the socket and leech piece. It would force people, if corruption gave you a socket, to go into this rat race where everybody has to do all these new events and hope that gear gets corrupted, then cleanse that corruption, and then you have a 445 gear, let's say gloves or boots, and it has a guaranteed socket now, and that socket alone could also increase gear item level by 10, 15, 20 item levels, depending on how strong those secondary stats are for you. And this also helps out if you get something that gives you, let's say, crit verse, and those are your best stats, and then you can slot more crit or more verse into the socket on top of it. So the one to go against that completely, this is a great thing that Blizzard is trying to account for everything they have so far. They're trying to prevent the rat race that we had for patch 8.2 with everybody re-rolling Bent the Gear over and over and over, and this is good. I'm actually very, very satisfied with how they've done things. This is a pretty big update in terms of what they are trying to do for gear, primarily from the raiders' perspective. If you are going to be doing any of the PvE content and really tackle it in a serious manner, this is really good. And they have so much time before 8.3 comes out. I'm glad that all that time is invested into testing these kind of things and trying to prevent problems from occurring. There still might be issues, but it looks like they're trying to handle all the business before it really goes live. And I understand with the release of Shadowdance during BlizzCon, I'm pretty sure most of the guys at Blizzard are hard at work, mostly focusing on Shadowlands. But I'm glad that this patch 8.3, with all this ample time it has before it releases, which is going to be way after the holidays, which is going to be quite a bit of time of wait, I'm glad that all that time is not being spent wasted. I'm glad that all that time is being spent working on the systems, working on making this patch at least an enjoyable experience, because a lot of people are super excited and cannot wait for Shadowlands to finally come out. I'm glad that they're going about this, and this was my update for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below about the corruption gear and the acquisition. There's a lot more for me to cover for patch 8.3, so let me know if you have any more questions. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see all of you in another video.